Fellow Sapiens, welcome. Tonight we take a long and gentle walk together through a story not of kings or battles, but of land and water, memory, and forgetting. If you're here to rest your mind while cooking, drifting to sleep, or quietly working, you're in the right place. So, dim the lights if you can. Breathe slowly, let the day recede. Here, you'll find slow storytelling, factual and calm, no hype. Just the careful weaving of evidence into a story that feels alive, even if it has been hidden for thousands of years. If you value this journey, consider subscribing, and perhaps tell me, how do you listen? In the quiet of night? On long drives? While stirring a pot? I'd love to know. And if you need timestamps for later, you'll find them in the description. Now, let's begin. Picture the North Sea at dawn. A boat rocks gently. Its trawl net rises from dark waters, dripping with seaweed and shells. The crew expect fish, perhaps cod or herring. Instead, tangled in the ropes lies something else. A long, curved piece of ivory, ridged with age. A mammoth tusk, pale against the morning light. For a moment, silence on deck. Then, quiet laughter, disbelief. They are not holding the future's meal, but the deep past's relic. What is a mammoth tusk doing out here, far from any shore, beneath this restless sea? Scenes like this have repeated for decades. Fishermen hauling up antlers, bones, worked flints, tiny fragments from a world that should not be here, because there is no land here anymore. And yet, once there was. Doggerland. A lost plain stretching from Britain across to Denmark, binding islands and continents. A place where rivers meandered, herds grazed, and people lived between 9,000 and 6,000 BCE. A place we now know only through fragments lifted from seabeds and maps made from echoes. The central question then, what was this Heartland like, and what happened to it? Was it a slow drowning, a sudden catastrophe, or something in between? And what can its vanishing teach us about our own precarious relationship with rising seas? In the next part, we'll step back and sketch the plain itself, where it lay, how far it stretched, and how it connected worlds. Imagine standing on a high ridge where the British coast now lies, some 11,000 years ago. To the east, you would not see water stretching unbroken to the horizon, but a wide green expanse of land. Low rivers wound their way through marsh and meadow, glittering in the morning light. Beyond, the plain rolled gently, dotted with stands of birch and pine. On clear days, you might see faint ridges where, millennia later, we would call them the coasts of Denmark and the Netherlands. This was Doggerland, a land that was not an island, but a bridge. Britain was not yet Britain, isolated across the sea, but simply the western reach of a great European plain. People and animals walked freely across it. Herds of red deer, aurochs, and wild horses grazed here. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceros still lingered in the cooler pockets, though by 9,000 BCE they were fading into memory. Elk browsed on willow saplings. Birds wheeled across reed beds. The land itself was shaped by the retreat of ice. As the last great glacial sheets withdrew northward, their weight lifted from the crust, rivers found new paths, and meltwater flooded valleys. Where once had been barren, scraped rock, soils deepened, plants took root, and a fertile steppe emerged. It was not uniform. In places, low hills rose where chalk or gravel ridges resisted erosion. In others, shallow lakes mirrored the sky. Along the margins, wetlands stretched broad and buzzing, teeming with fish and waterfowl. The central part of this plain, what archaeologists now call the Dogger Bank, was a great sand ridge, partly dry land, partly swamp, shaped by ancient tides. Today it is a hazard to shipping in the North Sea. Back then, it was a plateau where people might have camped. From a modern map, it is easy to forget how interconnected Europe once was. But consider the distances. From the current English coast to Denmark, perhaps 200 kilometers, or a long but traversable trek. Seasonal journeys would have been natural. Communities living by the rivers of what we call Norfolk today might wander east to hunt or to gather flint nodules. Groups from the continent could walk westward to fish in brackish lagoons. There was no need for boats, though small craft surely existed along rivers and estuaries. The importance of this connection cannot be overstated. The land served as both home and highway. When Britain was cut off thousands of years later, it would shape history profoundly. Languages, cultures, and migrations that might once have flowed smoothly across the plain would become divided by salt water. Doggerland was not unique. Around the world, shorelines were farther out. Sea levels stood much lower than today, locked in the ice sheets that had not yet melted. What makes Doggerland striking is not just its size, stretching hundreds of kilometers, home to thousands of people, but how quickly and completely it vanished. Archaeologists have pieced this geography together not through direct excavation, but through indirect echoes. Seismic surveys done for oil exploration revealed channels of ancient rivers buried beneath the seabed. Sonar has traced shorelines and lake beds. Each new scan outlines a ghostly map of vanished valleys and deltas. In a sense, Doggerland is more than a lost land. It is a reminder that what we take as permanent geography, coasts, islands, seas, is often fleeting. Over the course of just a few millennia, a rich plain can become an ocean floor. As we carry this picture forward, hold in mind both its abundance and its fragility. This was a land where human lives unfolded, but it was also a land already under threat, long before the first stone house was built in Mesopotamia or the pyramids rose in Egypt. In the next part, we'll explore how climate shifted at the dawn of the Holocene, and how warming temperatures reshaped not only Doggerland but the wider world that framed it. Close your eyes and imagine the tail end of the Ice Age. Not the frozen vastness of its peak, but the slow unraveling, the time when the ice loosened its grip. Around 12,000 years ago, Europe was in flux. By 9000 BCE, the story had shifted decisively into warmth. The glaciers that had once towered across northern Europe, pressing the land downward with their colossal weight, were in retreat. They melted back into Scandinavia, into the high mountains, leaving behind ridges of gravel, deep scoured lakes, and wide outwash plains. With every century, rivers ran stronger, carrying silt and stone, weaving new valleys where ice had once reigned. The global sea level was rising, not all at once, but steadily. At the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, seas stood about 120 meters lower than today. By 9000 BCE, meltwater had already raised them tens of meters. What had been dry land between continents was narrowing. Doggerland still stretched wide, but its edges were already fraying. The climate shift was not only about ice and water, it was about life. Where tundra had sprawled in cold winds, birch and pine now spread, followed by hazel, oak, and elm. Insects, birds, and mammals recolonized the new landscapes. The air grew softer, the seasons more distinct. And with this greening came people. Groups who had once followed herds across bleak steppes now settled in clearings and along rivers. Mesolithic hunter-fishers, skilled with microliths, tiny stone blades hafted into arrows and spears, moved into Doggerland. They came not in vast waves, but in small bands, families and communities seeking the resources of rivers, marshes, and coasts. For them, climate change was not an abstract curve on a graph, but a shifting horizon. Lakes appeared where none had been. Forests closed in over former grasslands. Marshes expanded. Paths once taken easily across firm ground now demanded detours. But the land was rich, even as it transformed. Fish swarmed the rivers, waterfowl nested in wetlands, nuts ripened in autumn groves. There were challenges too. The warming world was unstable, sudden cold snaps, like the 2-kilo-year event, a sharp chill likely triggered by glacial meltwater pulses, could disrupt ecosystems. People adapted, moving with the changes, seeking resilience in mobility and shared knowledge. It is easy, from our modern perspective, to imagine Doggerland's people as victims of an unstoppable flood. But for much of its history, the story was not drowning, but flourishing. This was a land of opportunity, opened by retreating ice and nourished by rivers. A place where the Holocene's gentle warmth allowed life to spread northward. Still, beneath the abundance lay fragility. The seas were rising, millimeter by millimeter, year by year. What seemed slow in a single lifetime became profound across generations. Elders might tell of riverbanks where camps once stood, now lost to marsh. Children might grow up fishing in estuaries where their grandparents had walked dry-footed. Memory itself became a marker of change. Scientists trace this transformation through proxies. Pollen cores drilled from peat beds show the spread of hazel and oak. Oxygen isotopes in shells reveal temperature shifts in coastal waters. Even tiny insects preserved in mud layers tell us of wetter, warmer conditions. Together, these strands weave the tale of a climate turning, a vast system changing course, reshaping not only landscapes, but the lives entangled with them. As we move forward, remember, Doggerland was not a static paradise. It was alive, shifting, in motion. A plane between worlds, yes, but also a place forever being redefined by ice, water, and time. In the next part, we'll pause to ask, how do we know any of this at all? From seismic scans to sonar sweeps, we'll explore the methods that allow scientists to reconstruct a world now hidden beneath the sea. To understand a vanished land, we must first learn how to see it. Doggerland does not lie waiting in open air, where we can walk its valleys and pick up its tools. It lies beneath tens of meters of seawater, blanketed by shifting sands, scoured by tides. And yet, through science, its ghostly outline emerges. The first clues came by chance. Fishermen hauling nets in the North Sea sometimes found not just fish, but antlers, tusks, bones of great beasts. Pieces of mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and even worked flints appeared on decks, coated in mud. These were tangible fragments of a lost land, but they told little of the whole. It was not until the 20th century, with the rise of offshore oil exploration, that a clearer picture began to form. To search for hydrocarbons beneath the seabed, companies used seismic surveys, sending pulses of sound down through layers of sediment and recording the echoes. To an engineer, these echoes revealed traps of oil and gas. To archaeologists, they revealed something else: drowned valleys, buried rivers, old coastlines. Imagine these seismic lines as ghostly X-rays of the seafloor, dark channels cut into lighter strata, ancient riverbeds, tens of kilometers wide, running now beneath the sea. In places, broad plains showed as level layers. In others, dunes and ridges. Stitch enough of these slices together, and you can build a map not of today, but of 10,000 years ago. Sonar added more detail. By sending sound sideways, researchers could trace textures on the seabed, ridges of gravel left by retreating glaciers, sandbanks shaped by tides, depressions that had once been lakes. Bathymetric surveys, mapping depths in fine grids, revealed the contours of the hidden landscape with precision that older generations could scarcely imagine. Out of this work, Doggerland's shape came into focus. A great plain, crossed by rivers that once joined the Rhine, the Thames, and the Elbe. Deltas spreading into shallow lagoons. A central plateau, the Doggerbank, rising above its surroundings. It was not guesswork, but pattern. Each channel matched what we would expect of rivers flowing when the sea was lower. Each layer of sediment aligned with the known timeline of glacial retreat. These methods are not perfect. Sound cannot tell us where a hearth once burned or where a family once built shelter. It sketches geography, not daily life. But without them, Doggerland would remain an empty blue patch on a nautical chart, instead of a place we can picture in our minds. Complementing these scans are sediment cores, long tubes of mud and sand, lifted from the seabed, layer by layer. Within them lie pollen grains, tiny fossils, fragments of charcoal. Each is a whisper of climate and vegetation. Oak pollen signals woodland, heather pollen signals heath. Shells of freshwater mollusks mark rivers and lakes. Marine shells mark the encroaching sea. By dating these layers, scientists can anchor their reconstructions in time. Together, seismic scans, sonar, bathymetry, and cores form the backbone of Doggerland's rediscovery. A drowned land is not truly lost if we can map its bones. And yet, these tools also raise questions of ethics. Much of the data comes from oil exploration, not archaeology. The same industry that helped reveal Doggerland also altered the seas with drilling and extraction. As with so many scientific advances, there is a tension between discovery and consequence. Still, the principle remains. To find a world, we must first learn to see it. And science gives us that vision, however partial. In the next part, we'll step away from scans and maps and walk imaginatively across this plain to picture the life it supported. What plants grew there? What animals roamed its forests and marshes? What sounds filled its air? Now that the outlines of Doggerland's rivers and hills have been drawn, let's try to fill them with life. For maps are only the skeleton. To bring the plain alive, we need flesh, the plants, animals, and sounds that once belonged here. Picture a summer morning, around 8500 BCE. Mist clings to the low marshes. The sun breaks over wide meadows where tall grasses bend in the breeze. Along the margins of rivers, willows lean toward the water, their roots binding soft banks. In drier ground, stands of birch shimmer pale and delicate, giving way to the darker greens of pine and, later, hazel. The air carries bird song, larks rising, ducks quacking in reed beds. geese calling as they settle on quiet lagoons. Deer move cautiously at the edge of the trees. Red deer, with their antlers high and branching, graze the grassy clearings. Roe deer slip more quietly through underbrush. Aurochs, the wild cattle that once roamed across Europe, paw at the earth, massive and dark-shouldered, their breath steaming in the cool morning. Further afield, shaggy elk browse on water plants in shallow pools. Beavers build dams from fallen branches. Otters slip in and out of riverbanks. In summer, salmon swim upriver, their silver bodies flashing in shallow water. Eels wind lazily in the shallows. For human communities, these waterways would have been pantries, full of protein at hand. The air, too, was thick with life. Clouds of midges swarmed above wetlands, a nuisance to people but a feast for swallows. Owls glided silently at dusk, hunting small mammals that scurried in the grasses. Ravens, ever opportunistic, followed herds and people alike, ready to scavenge what was left behind. And above all, the plain was a land of seasonal rhythm. In spring, wildflowers opened across meadows. In summer, nuts and berries ripened. Hazelnuts, in particular, became a vital food source, easy to gather, store, and roast. Autumn brought the migration of geese and the fattening of animals before winter. Winter itself was harsher, but not unlivable. The rivers did not freeze solid, and game animals remained to be hunted. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceros, which once ruled colder steppes, were fading by this time. Some had already disappeared from the region. Their bones dredged by trawlers are relics of an earlier age. Still, their presence in the archaeological record reminds us how recently humans here had shared the land with giants. It is easy to imagine Doggerland as untouched wilderness, but people shaped it. Mesolithic hunter-fishers lit fires on riverbanks. They cut hazel saplings to craft bows. They shaped flint into barbed points and tiny blades. The sound of napping stone, sharp cracks as flakes split off, might echo through camp at evening. Dogs, already companions, padded at the edges of firelight, guarding against wolves that prowled nearby. The abundance of Doggerland must have felt like security. Food sources were diverse: fish, shellfish, game, nuts, berries, waterfowl. Camps could be moved seasonally to follow resources. Canoes carved from hollowed logs allowed passage across rivers and lakes. Life was not easy, it never was, but it was rich. Still, it is important not to romanticize. Life expectancy was short. Injuries from hunting or accidents could be fatal. Harsh winters demanded resilience. Communities were small, perhaps just a few dozen individuals bound together by kinship. Yet in their skills, in reading animal tracks, shaping tools, managing fire, they carried knowledge honed across millennia. Through pollen grains and animal bones, we glimpse this abundance. Through isotopes in shells, we read the warmth of waters. Through flints shaped by human hands, we feel their presence. These traces let us reconstruct a world that, though drowned, remains vivid in its details. In the next part, we'll look more closely at these human traces themselves, the tools and artifacts dredged from the sea, and what they reveal about the people who once called Doggerland home. For centuries, sailors on the North Sea pulled up more than fish. Tangled in their nets came bones, antlers, and tusks, remnants of a colder age. But sometimes, the catch held something more deliberate: the unmistakable marks of human hands. A barbed antler harpoon, its prongs carefully carved. A flint blade, sharpened and retouched, gleaming faintly when washed free of sand. A polished stone axe head, smooth from labor. Each of these, lifted from the seabed, testifies not just to a lost landscape, but to the lives who moved through it. Most of the finds are Mesolithic, from around 9,000 to 6,000 BCE. This was a time when people across Europe lived as hunter-fishers, mobile but skilled in making tools suited to watery landscapes. In Doggerland, the abundance of rivers and coasts meant that fishing equipment was central. Barbed points carved from red deer antler, long and slender, were likely hafted onto shafts to spear salmon or eels. Some are so finely made that their barbs curve elegantly, each notch carefully cut. Flint tools also appear in trawlers' hulls. Microliths, small, sharp blades, often no longer than a thumbnail, were fixed into wooden shafts with resin, creating composite arrows or spears. Their size made them efficient to craft, easy to replace, and adaptable. A hunter might carry dozens in a pouch, repairing broken tips quickly. Occasionally, larger flint pieces surface. Axes, scrapers, burins. These tools hint at woodworking, hide, preparation, and domestic tasks. One polished axe found on the seabed shows evidence of long use, a sign that even before farming, people invested care in shaping tools meant to last. Antler was not only for harpoons. Some antler pieces were worked into mattocks or digging sticks. They would have been used to dig roots, open shellfish beds, or carve into earth for posts. The presence of such tools suggests that Doggerland's communities did more than hunt. They managed landscapes, shaped wood, and altered their surroundings with intent. But every artifact pulled from the sea also carries uncertainty. Nets scatter provenience. A harpoon raised today may have drifted far from its original resting place. Without context, without the hearth or midden it once belonged to, interpretation is cautious. Archaeologists must piece together patterns from fragments that have lost their home. Still, patterns emerge. Finds are concentrated in areas that would once have been rivers or lake margins, natural places for people to settle. The Dogger Bank, that shallow ridge, seems to have been particularly rich. We can imagine groups camping there, spearing fish in lagoons, gathering shellfish at low tide. There is also artistry in some of the finds. Carved antler points occasionally bear incised lines, not strictly functional, perhaps decorative, perhaps symbolic. These scratches may be the faint echoes of belief, identity, or story. We cannot know their meaning, but we can recognize the human impulse to mark the world. The tools remind us that Doggerland was no wilderness. It was inhabited, known, worked. Each flint struck, each antler carved, was an assertion of presence. We are here, this is our land, this is our life. In the next part, we'll step back to consider how myth and evidence have collided. For as long as Doggerland has been rediscovered, it has been compared to fabled lands, an Atlantis of the North. But what is legend and what is fact? When news of Doggerland began to trickle into popular awareness, a familiar label soon followed: Atlantis of the North. A drowned land, a vanished people, a world swallowed by the sea. It seemed to echo Plato's tale of Atlantis, told millennia earlier in his dialogues. But myth and evidence rarely align so neatly. Plato's Atlantis was described as an advanced island civilization, destroyed in a single cataclysm. Doggerland, by contrast, was not an island but a vast lowland plain, gradually inundated over millennia. Its communities were not kings in marble palaces, but small groups of Mesolithic hunter-fishers. Its end was not one night of thunderous collapse, but a drawn-out retreat punctuated by episodes of sudden flooding. And yet, the comparison persists. Why? Perhaps because humans are drawn to stories of loss, of lands that vanish, of warnings embedded in deep time. Across cultures, tales abound of drowned lands. In Welsh tradition, there is Contrair Gwaelod, a fertile kingdom swallowed by the sea. In Breton lore, the city of Ys sinks beneath waves when its defenses fail. Along the coasts of the North Sea, fishermen once spoke of bells tolling underwater, echoes of churches lost to flood. Do these myths preserve folk memory of Doggerland? Some scholars are cautious. Oral tradition can carry fragments of real events, but over thousands of years, stories change shape, mingle with metaphor, and adapt to new contexts. The flooding of medieval towns in the Low Countries may have contributed just as much to these legends as any Mesolithic drowning. Still, it is striking how often human imagination returns to the image of a drowned homeland. Perhaps it reflects a shared awareness that seas do rise, that coasts shift, that communities can be lost. Doggerland provides a real-world anchor to this recurring theme. The evidence itself grounds us. Radiocarbon dating of bones and wood shows the gradual narrowing of habitable land between 9,000 and 6,000 BCE. Sediment cores reveal transitions from freshwater to brackish to fully marine conditions, a slow encroachment of salt. Seismic maps show river valleys pinched by growing estuaries. These are patient traces, not a singular catastrophe, and yet, Doggerland's end may have had moments of drama. The Storegga slide, a massive submarine landslide off Norway around 6100 BCE, generated a tsunami that surged across the North Sea. Low-lying camps in Doggerland would have been inundated suddenly, perhaps fatally. To those living there, such an event might indeed have seemed like the sea rising in fury, swallowing the world. Here we find a bridge between myth and evidence. Doggerland was not Atlantis, but it was a homeland lost to water. Its disappearance was not legendary but geological, not a parable but a process. Still, in the human mind, those processes echo as story. A vanished land beneath the sea becomes a symbol, whether of hubris, warning, or grief. It reminds us that myth is not falsehood, but a kind of mirror. Legends reflect human fears and memories, shaped and reshaped through time. Evidence gives us the slower, steadier story, written in mud and bone. Between them, we glimpse how people past and present have tried to make sense of change too vast to hold in a single lifetime. In the next part, we'll return from the world of myth to the lived reality of Doggerland's people, how they may have moved, traded, and built connections across this plain between continents. Let us walk, slowly, across Doggerland as it might have been around 8000 BCE. The sun hangs low on a spring morning, mist lifts from wetlands, ahead stretches a track worn by many feet, human and animal alike. This was not wilderness untouched. It was a lived landscape, marked by pathways, campsites, and seasonal returns. Hunter-fisher-gatherer communities were small, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals bound by kinship. They moved as the land required, to salmon runs in spring, nut groves in autumn, winter shelters near riverbanks where reeds cut the wind. Doggerland was not merely a home, it was a crossroads. To the west lay the chalk ridges of Britain, to the east the broad lowlands of the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. Rivers braided the land into corridors. The ancestral Thames and Rhine merged here, spreading into deltas rich with fish and bird life. Along these arteries, people traveled easily. Archaeologists suggest that groups were mobile yet interconnected. Microlith tool styles show patterns shared across regions. A barbed harpoon found in the North Sea resembles those from inland Denmark. Flint from southern England turns up far to the north. These echoes suggest exchange, not necessarily trade in the modern sense, but movement, gifting, and shared traditions binding communities together. Picture a meeting at a river bend. Two bands converge, each with dogs trotting at their heels. They share fish smoked over fires, exchange new stories, perhaps swap tools or ornaments. Such gatherings were vital, for social bonds, for marriage alliances, for maintaining knowledge that no single group could hold alone. Dogs deserve a moment here. Already domesticated for thousands of years, they were companions, hunters, and guards. Their presence made movement safer and hunting more efficient. Footprints of humans and dogs, pressed side by side in Mesolithic mud along ancient coasts, remind us how inseparable the two species had become. Waterways were lifelines. Logboats, hollowed trunks smoothed by fire and adze, carried people across rivers and lagoons. These were not ocean-going vessels, but practical craft for crossing channels, moving goods, and fishing deeper waters. Along estuaries, fish traps built from stakes and woven hurdles may have guided salmon into nets. Such simple engineering multiplied food security. Community life was practical, but also likely symbolic. Ornaments made from animal teeth, amber beads, and decorated antler points suggest more than subsistence. These items carried meaning, identity, memory, or belief. The land itself may have been storied, with hills, rivers, and groves holding significance. Still, life was vulnerable. A broken limb or harsh winter could threaten survival. Groups balanced mobility with continuity, always ready to move, yet tied to remembered places where resources were reliable. Pathways across Doggerland were thus more than routes. They were threads of resilience. As archaeologists trace these pathways through scattered finds, they see not isolated groups but a tapestry, people moving, meeting, adapting, carrying knowledge across a shared plain. It was a landscape of circulation, not borders. In the next part, we'll turn from people's movement to the traces left in the mud itself. Sediment cores drawn from the seabed hold pollen, insects, and shells, the quiet recorders of climate, vegetation, and change. This is where science allows us to listen to the land's memory. If seismic scans draw the skeleton of Doggerland, then mud provides its voice. The seabed is not silent. Within its layers lie tiny fossils, pollen grains, shells, and chemical signatures that tell us, softly but clearly, what once lived here. Imagine lowering a hollow tube into the sea floor. It pushes through sand, silt, clay. When it is pulled back up, it carries a vertical timeline, a core of sediment, each layer stacked like pages in a book. At the bottom, older deposits laid down thousands of years ago. At the top, younger sediments closer to the present. From such cores, scientists can reconstruct Doggerland's environment with remarkable detail. Pollen grains are among the most telling. Invisible to the naked eye, they survive for millennia, their tough outer shells resisting decay. Under a microscope, each species looks distinct. Oak pollen with its tri-lobed form, birch with its simple curves, hazel with its unmistakable shape. By counting and identifying grains in each layer, researchers can chart the rise of forests. Around 9000 BCE, birch and pine dominated. By 7000 BCE, hazel and oak had spread widely. The plain was turning from open steppe into woodland. Insect remains add further texture. Beetle wing cases, preserved in peat, indicate temperature and moisture. Certain species thrive only in wetlands, others in dry meadows. By studying them, scientists confirm shifting landscapes. Marsh expanding, forests closing in, summers warming. Shells and microfossils provide clues to water. Freshwater mollusks in early layers tell of rivers and lakes. Later, brackish species appear, marking the slow intrusion of salt water. Marine shells in upper layers announce the final submergence. These transitions show us the drowning not as sudden myth, but as a gradual, measurable process. Chemical signatures within the sediments offer climate signals. Oxygen isotopes in shells record the temperature of the water in which they formed. Layers of volcanic ash, blown in from distant eruptions, serve as time markers. A thin gray line of ash might match a known eruption in Iceland, giving a precise calendar date to the mud around it. And sometimes, there are more direct traces of people. Charcoal flecks hint at ancient fires, whether natural or human-made. Worked flints trapped in peaty layers confirm human activity. In the future, even more may be possible. Ancient DNA from sediments, fragments of genetic material shed by plants, animals, and people, preserved in microscopic amounts. Already, pilot studies show promise. Traces of mammoth DNA, even human DNA, identified from cave sediments. The same might be drawn from Doggerland's mud. Yet these methods carry challenges. Sampling at sea is costly. Strong currents and modern trawling disturb sediments. And the very act of coring is destructive. Once lifted, that slice of mud cannot be replaced. There is an ethical balance here, knowledge gained at the expense of the site itself. Scientists proceed carefully, taking as little as possible, documenting as fully as they can. What emerges from these cores is not just data, but story. Forests spreading, marshes expanding, saltwater rising, people lighting fires, animals moving across plains. Each grain of pollen, each shell, is a syllable in the drowned plain's whispering memory. In the next part, we'll consider one of the deepest uncertainties. How many people lived on Doggerland? Was it a sparsely visited hunting ground, or a thriving heartland with thousands of inhabitants? One of the simplest questions about Doggerland is also one of the hardest to answer. How many people lived there? Was it merely a seasonal hunting ground, visited by small bands moving in and out, or was it home to thriving, stable communities numbering in the thousands? Archaeologists must tread carefully here. Unlike a city of stone, Doggerland left no streets, no walls, no cemeteries to count. Its remains lie scattered and submerged, pulled up in trawl nets or glimpsed in core samples. From such fragments, population estimates are more inference than certainty. What can be said with some confidence is that people were there, and not just passing through. The number and variety of artifacts recovered, from harpoons to flint microliths, points to repeated long-term occupation. Seasonal camps may have dotted riverbanks, with families returning year after year to familiar spots rich in fish or game. Some researchers suggest that Doggerland could have supported thousands of people at its peak. Fertile soils, abundant rivers, forests, and wetlands would have offered food security unusual for Mesolithic hunter-fishers. Unlike harsher uplands or arid steppes, Doggerland was a resource-rich plain. The carrying capacity, how many people the land could feed, would have been significant. And yet, it was unlikely a densely populated heartland by modern standards. Communities were small, mobile, and spread out. A cluster here along a river bend, another camp near a hazel grove, others by the lagoons of the Dogger Bank. People moved often, in tune with seasons and resources. The landscape itself encouraged dispersal, rather than crowding. Comparison helps. Similar environments in Mesolithic Europe, like the wetlands of Denmark or the forests of the Baltic, supported populations that were numerous but scattered. Villages as we know them, had not yet formed. Instead, networks of families linked through exchange, marriage, and seasonal gatherings created a loose web of human presence. It is also possible that Doggerland's population fluctuated over centuries. During warmer, stable phases, groups may have flourished and expanded. During colder snaps, or when sea level rise claimed key areas, numbers may have dropped. Archaeology catches only snapshots, not continuous census records. Here lies the uncertainty box. Without settlements preserved in place, without human remains securely dated and mapped, we cannot yet know the true scale of Doggerland's population. Every estimate remains provisional. Perhaps thousands lived there, perhaps only hundreds, perhaps both at different times. Still, the very asking of the question matters. It reminds us that Doggerland was not an empty plain, but a lived one. Each artifact was shaped by a hand, each hearth lit by a family, each path walked by people who carried their children, their tools, their memories. Whether a few hundred or a few thousand, they mattered, and their presence changed the land as much as the land shaped them. In the next part, we'll follow the rising seas themselves, the slow, steady encroachment of water that year by year narrowed Doggerland's breadth, reshaping lives in ways both subtle and profound. If you lived in Doggerland around 8500 BCE, the sea would have seemed far away. Broad plains stretched outward, rivers meandered gently, and distant ridges marked horizons. Yet, across generations, the water crept closer, not as a sudden wall, but as a patient tide. Sea levels worldwide were rising as the great ice sheets of North America and Eurasia melted. At the peak of the Ice Age, seas stood more than 100 meters lower than today. By the early Holocene, around 9000 BCE, much of that water had already returned to the oceans. But meltwater pulses still came, lifting the seas meter by meter over centuries. In Doggerland, that meant coastlines never stayed fixed. What grandparents remembered as dry meadow might, in a child's lifetime, become marsh. River valleys shifted, filling with brackish water. Freshwater lakes slowly turned tidal. The soundscape changed too, the splash of fish where once had been the rustle of grass. Archaeological evidence bears out this story. Sediment cores show clear transitions. Freshwater mollusks replaced by brackish species, then by fully marine shells. Layers of peat, once formed in wetlands, are overlain by marine sands, each layer a quiet marker of encroaching salt. For people, adaptation was the rule. Camps shifted inland, canoes carried families across newly flooded channels. Communities learned to exploit estuaries teeming with fish and shellfish. Rising seas did not end life on Doggerland immediately, they transformed it. A marsh, though less suitable for deer hunting, became a haven for waterfowl and fish. And yet, the process had limits. Slowly Doggerland's breadth narrowed. Britain, once just a ridge on the western side of the plain, began to drift into insularity. The first permanent channels cut through, turning paths into crossings. By around 8000 BCE, sea level rise was measured in centimeters per year, barely perceptible in a single lifetime, but relentless across centuries. Imagine the way memory would hold this change. Elders telling children, "We used to camp there, by the bend in the river. Now it is a wide water." Or hunters pointing across an estuary. "Beyond that water was once our path." A slow erosion of familiarity, carried in story as much as in geography. Some researchers suggest that people may have held spiritual or symbolic interpretations of the encroaching sea. Many indigenous traditions worldwide view rising water as both destruction and renewal. Perhaps Doggerland land's people too wove meaning around the loss. Not only grief, but adaptation, resilience, and new opportunity. Still, the slow drowning was a prelude to sharper shocks. For beyond steady tides lay sudden events, catastrophic surges that could overwhelm in hours what the sea usually claimed in centuries. One such event looms large in Doggerland's story: the Storegga Slide, a submarine landslide off Norway that triggered a tsunami across the North Atlantic. In the next part, we'll focus on that moment, how it may have struck Doggerland, and how it adds drama to the long, quiet tale of a plane sinking beneath the waves. Most of Doggerland's story is one of gradual change. Seas inching upward, marshes spreading, rivers turning brackish. But woven into that slow drowning is at least one moment of sudden violence. Around 6100 BCE, far to the north, a mountain of seafloor collapsed. This was the Storegga Slide, one of the largest known submarine landslides in Earth's history. Off the coast of Norway, a massive shelf of sediment, built up over millennia at the edge of the continental slope, gave way. Perhaps triggered by an earthquake, perhaps destabilized by lingering effects of glacial melt, the slide sent billions of tons of material rushing downslope into the deep. The displacement of water was immense. A tsunami fanned outward across the North Atlantic. We know of this event not from legend, but from layers of sand. In coastal Norway, Scotland, and even as far as the Shetland Islands, archaeologists have found thin bands of marine sand embedded within peat. These are tsunami deposits, laid down when great waves swept inland, carrying salt water and shells into what had been freshwater wetlands. Radiocarbon dating places them around 6100 BCE, aligning with the timing of the Storegga slide. What did this mean for Doggerland? The low-lying plain was directly in the path of the surge. Models suggest waves several meters high racing across the shallow North Sea. Estuaries would have funneled the water inward, amplifying its reach. Camps along lagoons or rivers could have been overwhelmed within minutes. To a Mesolithic family on the plain, the event must have been terrifying. Imagine standing by a tidal channel when the water begins to withdraw unnaturally fast, exposing fish flapping on the mud. Moments later, a wall of water roars back, carrying trees, debris, and anything in its way. Fires extinguished, shelters swept aside, lives lost. And yet this tsunami was not the end of Doggerland. The plain did not vanish overnight. After the surge receded, much of the land still stood above sea level. People likely returned, rebuilding, shifting camps slightly inland. The drowning continued its slower pace, but the event would have left dubious deep scars, physical and perhaps cultural. Could memory of such a flood echo through time as legend? Some have speculated so. Tales of drowned lands around the North Sea coast may carry faint echoes of this or similar events, but we cannot know. What evidence we do have lies in sand grains and broken peat, not in words. What the Storegga slide reminds us of is scale. Even in an age of gradual change, sudden shocks mattered. For the people of Doggerland, life meant constant adaptation to shifting seasons, shifting rivers, and sometimes to disasters no one could foresee. In the next part, we'll return to uncertainty itself. Beyond what the evidence shows clearly, there are vast spaces of the unknown. How exactly did people live day by day? What stories did they tell? What beliefs did they hold? What choices did they face as the waters rose? These are questions we may never fully answer. For all that seismic scans and pollen grains can reveal, there is so much we cannot know. Doggerland's people left no cities, no carved stones, no written records. What remains are scattered tools, animal bones, pollen and mud, fragments too sparse to reconstruct the full fabric of their lives. Take daily routines. We can imagine families rising at dawn, tending fires, preparing tools, setting out to fish or hunt. But the exact rhythms, what songs they sang, how they told stories around the fire, the way they laughed or grieved, are beyond recovery. Archaeology sketches outlines, but the colors of lived experience are gone. We also do not know how Doggerland's communities understood the sea's advance. Did they see it as a slow natural shift, inconvenient, but part of the cycles of the world? Or did they feel it as loss, a taking away of familiar places? Did they map meaning onto the encroaching water, perhaps weaving myths or rituals around it? We cannot say. Population numbers remain elusive too, as we explored earlier. Was Doggerland a major heartland with thousands of inhabitants, or a lightly used hunting ground, visited seasonally? The truth may lie somewhere between, populations swelling in fertile centuries, then thinning as marshes expanded. But exact figures remain beyond reach. Even the artifacts we recover pose puzzles. A carved antler harpoon dredged from the seabed shows both function and ornament. Was the decoration symbolic? Did it mark ownership, carry ritual meaning, or simply reflect an individual's creativity? With no direct context, we cannot be sure. And what of burial practices? Across Mesolithic Europe, we find occasional graves, sometimes adorned with red ochre, sometimes with tools or ornaments. But from Doggerland itself, no intact burials have yet been found. Did they bury their dead in ways that are now lost to the sea? Did waterlogging erase the traces, or have we simply not yet discovered them? The absence itself is a question. The uncertainty extends to social structure. Were Doggerland's people organized into small egalitarian bands, as is typical of hunter-fisher societies? Did they form broader alliances, meeting at seasonal gathering places? Were there leaders, shamans, or elders whose influence shaped decisions? The evidence cannot yet tell us. These gaps matter. They remind us that Doggerland is not a solved puzzle, but an ongoing investigation. Each artifact, each core sample, adds a piece, yet vast stretches remain blank. The temptation to imagine, to fill the silence with our own projections, is strong. But as calm storytellers, we must also pause and acknowledge, here we do not know. Still, uncertainty has its own value. It keeps the story open, inviting new discoveries. It reminds us of humility, that the past is not ours to command, but to approach carefully, piece by piece, with respect. In the next part, we'll look toward one of the most promising frontiers of evidence, the study of ancient DNA in sediments. For even in the mud, fragments of life linger, and they may yet whisper of Doggerland's people, plants, and animals in astonishing detail. Mud does more than preserve pollen and shells. Hidden within its grains are fragments of genetic material, strands of DNA shed by plants, animals, and even humans thousands of years ago. This is environmental DNA, or eDNA, microscopic traces left behind in skin cells, hair, dung, or decayed tissue now bound into sediments. For Doggerland, this offers a new window into life on a land we cannot see. Until recently, the idea of recovering DNA from soil or seabed seemed improbable. But advances in molecular techniques have changed that. In caves across Europe, researchers have identified Neanderthal DNA lingering in sediments, even where no bones survived. In Siberian permafrost, mammoth DNA has been sequenced from soil alone. If such material can persist in those settings, then Doggerland's drowned peat beds and estuaries may hold similar treasures. Early pilot studies show promise. Sediment cores from submerged landscapes have yielded genetic traces of plants, hazel, willow, oak, confirming the pollen record. Animal DNA fragments hint at deer, fish, and waterfowl once present in now drowned valleys. The technology is still young, but its potential is profound. To reconstruct Doggerland's ecosystems not just from indirect proxies, but from the molecules of life itself. The holy grail, of course, would be human DNA. If traces of Mesolithic people can be recovered from Doggerland's sediments, it could transform our understanding. We could compare their genetics with those of contemporaries across Europe, tracing lineages, connections, and movements. Did Doggerland's communities share ancestry with groups in Denmark? Were they connected to those in southern Britain? eDNA could one day provide answers, but there are challenges. Ancient DNA is fragile, easily degraded by water and time. The North Sea's shifting sediments are harsh environments. Salt, currents, and oxygen all work against preservation. To recover eDNA requires careful sampling, and even then, results are fragmentary, tiny scraps rather than full genomes. There are also ethical questions. Extracting DNA, even environmental, touches on issues of ancestry and heritage. Indigenous groups worldwide have raised concerns about how ancient DNA is handled, who interprets it, and what stories are told. Doggerland's people have no direct descendants who can speak for them, yet respect still matters. Scientists must balance curiosity with care, ensuring that these traces are studied with humility rather than ownership. Still, the possibility is exhilarating. Imagine being able to list not just oak pollen, but the genetic fingerprint of specific oak species. Not just red deer bones, but the DNA of the herd that once grazed there. Not just flint tools, but traces of the people who shaped them. Environmental DNA does not replace other evidence. It complements it. Seismic scans show landscapes, pollen shows vegetation, bones show diets. eDNA weaves through them all, confirming, refining, and sometimes surprising. It may yet allow us to paint Doggerland in colors richer than we dared hope. For now, it remains a frontier, a method still developing, a promise more than a completed picture. But even as science edges forward, the thought is humbling. That beneath the restless waves of the North Sea, in silent layers of mud, tiny fragments of life linger, waiting to be read, waiting to remind us that Doggerland's story is not finished. In the next part, we'll pause for an ethical reflection. When we probe submerged landscapes, when we extract cores and sample DNA, what responsibilities do we carry toward the past, and toward the people who once walked these drowned plains. Whenever we reach for the past, we carry responsibility. Doggerland is not simply a curiosity, not just a puzzle for scientists to solve. It was once a homeland. People lived there, raised children there, buried their dead there. To study it is to touch fragments of human heritage, and that calls for care. Underwater archaeology poses unique challenges. The seabed is not a quiet museum. It is plowed by trawler nets, cut by dredgers, probed by oil and gas exploration. Many of the tools and bones that surface are chance finds, pulled up accidentally by fishermen. In this sense, much knowledge is already being lost, scattered or discarded without record. But deliberate recovery has its own risks. Each core drilled, each sample lifted, is an intervention. Mud removed cannot be put back. There are also questions of consent. On land, archaeologists often work with local communities, ensuring that excavations respect cultural values. But Doggerland has no direct descendants to consult. Its people left no living group that can speak with authority over their remains. Does this mean the land is free to study without limit? Or does it mean we should proceed with even greater humility, precisely because the voices of its former inhabitants cannot be heard? Consider human remains. So far, few have been recovered from the seabed, but it is possible that future dredging or excavation will uncover them. In many countries, strict laws and ethical codes govern how ancient human remains are treated, with dignity, with respect, often reburied after study. Underwater, the boundaries are less clear. Should the bones of Doggerland's people be displayed or returned to the sea? Should their DNA be sequenced, or should limits be drawn? Different scholars answer differently. Another ethical tension lies in the use of industrial data. Much of what we know about Doggerland comes from seismic surveys conducted for oil and gas exploration. These scans were not made for heritage, but for profit. Archaeologists gain insight from them. Yet, at the same time, the industry itself contributes to environmental change, including rising seas that threaten coastal heritage today. The paradox is sharp. Our vision of a drowned land is partly a byproduct of activities that drive modern drownings. And then there is climate change. As seas continue to rise, submerged landscapes worldwide are at risk of erosion. Doggerland is already gone, but its preservation beneath layers of sand may not last forever. Should we hurry to sample and document what we can before currents erase it? Or should we leave it untouched, acknowledging that not all pasts can be saved? The balance is delicate. Most archaeologists advocate a middle path: careful, minimal intrusion, full documentation, respect for remains, transparency in research. Heritage is not only about discovery, but about stewardship. Doggerland is part of the shared human story. Its lessons belong not to one nation or one discipline, but to us all. When we drill into its mud, when we lift its tools from the sea, we are not just handling data, we are handling memory. In the next part, we'll widen the lens. Doggerland was not the only land drowned by rising seas. Across the world, other plains and coastlines share its fate. Together they tell a larger story about humans living at the edge of change. Doggerland was not alone. Around the world, the end of the Ice Age brought seas that rose and spread, swallowing coastlines, islands, and entire regions. What happened beneath the North Sea was part of a global pattern, a reshaping of Earth's face that humans everywhere experienced. Consider the Persian Gulf. 10,000 years ago, much of what is now ocean was a wide plain, watered by the Tigris and Euphrates as they wound toward the Gulf. Archaeologists believe people once lived there, gathering along rivers and lagoons before the sea advanced. Some have suggested it may even have been a cradle for early farming communities, though evidence remains debated. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf, now beneath the waters between Indonesia and mainland Asia, was a vast continent-like landmass. As seas rose, it fragmented into the islands we know today: Sumatra, Java, Borneo. To the north, Sahul once linked Australia and New Guinea, before flooding divided them. Closer to Doggerland, other drowned landscapes dot Europe's coasts. The Solent, in southern England, was once a wooded valley before the Channel waters cut through. The Black Sea basin may have flooded rapidly around 7,500 years ago, transforming a large freshwater lake into the saltwater sea we know today, though scholars debate the speed and scale of that change. Each of these drowned lands reminds us that coastlines are not permanent. They shift, they migrate, they erase. For humans, the memory of such change has often been preserved in story. Tales of lost lands, sunken kingdoms, and flood myths exist across cultures. While we must be cautious not to read them all literally, they reveal how deeply rising waters impress themselves upon human imagination. Doggerland stands out for two reasons. First, its size. It was not a narrow coastal strip, but a vast plain, stretching hundreds of kilometers. Second, the richness of evidence. Through seismic scans, dredge tools, and cores, we can reconstruct it with unusual clarity. It is one of the best studied examples of a drowned land, and so it serves as a symbol for many others. To place Doggerland in context is to see it not as anomaly, but as chapter. Around 9,000 to 6,000 BCE, humans everywhere were navigating landscapes in motion. Valleys flooded, estuaries widened, islands emerged, communities adapted, moving inland, inventing new strategies, sometimes leaving traces of sorrow, sometimes leaving none at all. This global perspective also brings the story closer to our present. Today, seas are rising again, driven not by retreating glaciers, but by human-driven warming. Coastal plains from Bangladesh to Florida face inundation. Cities built on deltas may one day echo Doggerland's fate. The difference is speed, and the presence of billions of people rather than thousands. In Doggerland's silence, then, lies a mirror. The drowned heartland of Europe is both distant and familiar. It reminds us that landscapes are fragile, that seas claim what they will, and that people must adapt or move. In the next part, we'll leave the broad view and step gently into imagination. What might daily life in Doggerland have felt like if we walked its meadows and sat by its fires? A calm reimagining, not speculation for its own sake, but a way to bring the plain closer to our senses. Let's take a slow walk into Doggerland as it might have felt to live there. Not to romanticize or invent wildly, but to stitch together fragments of evidence into a calm, sleep-friendly scene. It is late summer, around 7,000 BCE. The plain is alive with color. Hazelnuts fall thickly from groves, their shells littering the ground where families gather to crack and roast them. Smoke from small fires curls upward, drifting across reeds where dragonflies shimmer in the light. The air hums with insects, and above them, geese circle, calling as they prepare for autumn flights. A camp rests by a river bend. The shelters are simple, frames of wood covered with hides, enough to keep out rain and wind. Inside, mats of woven reeds soften the floor. At one fire, fish roast on sticks, their oils sizzling in the flames. At another, a woman scrapes a deer hide with a flint tool, her motions practiced, the rhythm steady. Children play nearby, splashing in the shallows, chasing each other with shrieks of laughter. They hold tiny bows, strung with sinew, shooting blunt arrows at reed targets. A dog trots among them, ears pricked, tail wagging, part guardian, part playmate. Men and women alike prepare for the hunt. Some shape flints into microliths, pressing them into resin and hafting them onto arrow shafts. Others inspect antler harpoons, smoothing barbs worn from use. The tools are both practical and beautiful, carrying the marks of hands that knew their craft deeply. As evening comes, the camp gathers. A small deer has been brought down, its meat roasting slowly, its bones already set aside for tools. Someone begins to sing, a low, repetitive chant, rising and falling with the crackle of the fire. The others join in, voices weaving together, carrying across the marsh. The words are lost to us, but the rhythm is human, timeless. A song to mark the day, to bind the group, to carry memory forward. Later, under stars bright and sharp without city lights, stories are told. A grandfather speaks of rivers that once flowed wider, of places now lost to marsh. His tale is part memory, part teaching, part warning. The children listen, their eyelids heavy, as the fire dwindles to embers. Beyond the camp, wolves howl, distant but real. The dogs bristle, but no one is afraid. This is life known, accepted, embraced. Scenes like this are not fantasy. They are extrapolations from sites across Mesolithic Europe. Hearths, flints, hazelnut shells, footprints preserved in mud. The details may vary, but the essence holds true. Doggerland's people were not alien. They laughed, worked, played, worried, and celebrated, much as we do. In picturing them, we bridge the gap between artifact and experience. We remember that each harpoon dredged from the sea was once held by a hand, aimed at a flashing fish. Each pollen grain in mud was once a tree shading a real person. Each drowned valley was once someone's home. In the next part, we'll return to the theme of uncertainty. Doggerland has given us many traces, yet vast questions remain. What drowned, what survived, and what echoes can we still hear in today's coasts? When we think of Doggerland, we imagine a land erased, swallowed by the sea, lost forever. But not everything drowned, and not everything is gone. What survives is a patchwork. Some material traces beneath the seabed, some echoes in surrounding landscapes, and some questions still hovering, unanswered. The most obvious uncertainty is about the land itself. Seismic scans sketch rivers and valleys, but fine details vanish. Where exactly did people camp? Which ridges sheltered them from winds? Which lagoons teemed with fish? Without direct excavation, these questions remain shadows. We also do not know how much of Doggerland's lifeways persisted after the plains flooding. As seas rose and Britain became an island, did its communities retreat westward into what is now England? Did others migrate east into continental Europe? Were their networks strong enough to carry families across the new waters, ensuring continuity of kin? Or did the rising sea sever ties, leaving isolated groups on either side? Archaeology offers hints, but no certainty. Some elements surely survived. Flintworking traditions evident in Doggerland artifacts continue in Mesolithic Britain and Denmark. Hunting and fishing technologies spread widely. The dogs that trotted at Mesolithic heels are ancestors of many still with us today. In this sense, Doggerland's legacy flows forward in continuity, even if the plain itself was lost. But cultural memory is harder to trace. Did stories of the drowning survive in oral tradition? Along the coasts of the North Sea, later legends tell of sunken lands, ringing bells, cities swallowed by waves. Are these echoes of Doggerland, or of more recent medieval floods that ravaged the Low Countries? Perhaps both. Oral memory can stretch far, but it also changes shape with each telling. There are uncertainties in the material record too. Bones dredged from the seabed tell us which animals lived there, but not how people hunted them. Tools show design, but not always purpose. A decorated antler point may be practical, ceremonial, or both. Without context, interpretation floats. And then there are questions of resilience. Did Doggerland's people experience the sea's rise as relentless tragedy, or as manageable adaptation? Archaeology worldwide suggests that many hunter-fisher societies are flexible, shifting camps, changing diets, adjusting lifeways. Doggerland may have been no different, its loss a challenge, but not the end of its people's story. Still, the sudden tsunami of the Storegga slide may have tested that resilience in ways gradual change did not. What survives, then, is partial. Some tools in museum cases, some mammoth bones on trawler decks, some faint river channels and seismic maps. And perhaps, in our own imaginations, the ability to see people where evidence is sparse, to know they were there, even when the details blur. Uncertainty is not failure, it is invitation. Each blank space calls for new methods, sharper tools, careful patience. And it keeps Doggerland alive, not as a closed chapter, but as a living question. In the next part, we'll look at those methods more closely again. The cutting-edge technologies now pushing the frontier, from photogrammetry to proteomics, and how they might one day give Doggerland back more of its story. To glimpse Doggerland today requires more than nets and chance finds. It calls for a toolkit of modern science, technologies that can peer through water, sediment, and time. Each advance sharpens the picture, turning faint shadows into clearer outlines. We've already spoken of seismic surveys and sediment cores, the backbone of discovery, but new methods extend further. Multi-beam sonar, for example, sweeps the seabed with overlapping sound waves, building detailed 3D maps. Submerged river channels emerge in stunning clarity, as if valleys and ridges were freshly carved. Features once guessed at from blurry lines now stand as landscapes in relief. Photogrammetry adds another layer. By stitching together thousands of underwater photographs, divers and remotely operated vehicles can reconstruct seafloor features in digital 3D. A single artifact, say, a flint axe half buried in sand, can be mapped precisely in place, preserving context before it is disturbed. Then there is the microscopic frontier. Proteomics, the study of ancient proteins, offers resilience where DNA decays. Proteins in bones, teeth, or sediments can identify species long after genetic material is gone. In Doggerland's waterlogged environment, proteins may outlast fragile DNA, offering new insights into animals and people once present. Isotopic analysis pushes deeper into daily life. Strontium and oxygen isotopes in teeth can reveal where an individual grew up, their geological address encoded in enamel. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes in bone collagen trace diet. Whether a person ate more fish or land game, more nuts or meat. Imagine one day applying these methods to human remains from Doggerland, reconstructing the lifeways of individuals across the drowned plain. Remote sensing also evolves. LiDAR, though usually airborne, can sometimes penetrate shallow waters, mapping subtle topography. Combined with computer modeling of past sea levels, it allows reconstructions of Doggerland's changing shoreline across centuries. And then, of course, there is ancient DNA, as we explored earlier. Environmental samples, even microscopic traces, carry whispers of vanished ecosystems. Each breakthrough makes it more likely that Doggerland's genetic tapestry will one day be sequenced. Plants, animals, perhaps even its people. Technology, however, is only as powerful as the questions we ask. Are we trying to map where rivers flowed? To estimate how many people lived there? To see how they adapted to flooding? Each method illuminates part of the story, but never the whole. There are limits too. Seas are restless. Trawling, dredging, and modern industry disturb sediments. Funding is limited. Few projects can afford the cost of deep coring or sonar mapping across vast areas. And every method is interpretive. A line of data becomes a river only because we understand its pattern. A pollen grain becomes a forest only because we compare it to modern analogs. Certainty is rare. Probability is more honest. Yet the trajectory is hopeful. 50 years ago, Doggerland was a rumor built on fishermen's finds. Today, it is a mapped, modeled, and increasingly detailed landscape, its rivers and ridges traced with scientific precision. Tomorrow, with DNA, proteins, isotopes, and digital reconstructions, we may walk through it virtually, seeing not just land but lifeways. Technology does not resurrect the drowned plain, but it does let us listen more closely to its echoes. In the next part, we'll turn from methods back to meaning. What does Doggerland teach us here and now about climate, change, and resilience? And how might its story guide our own uncertain future? Doggerland is gone. Its meadows, rivers, and camps now lie beneath restless waters. Yet its story remains, drawn from bones, pollen, mud, and maps. What does this drowned heartland have to teach us, across 9,000 years, about ourselves? First, it reminds us that landscapes are not fixed. What we see on maps today, coasts, islands, seas, is a snapshot in deep time. For most of human history, Britain was not an island but a peninsula, linked by fertile plains. The North Sea was not a barrier, but a bridge. The lesson is humility. Geography shifts, and with it, the possibilities of human life. Second, Doggerland shows resilience. Its people did not vanish at the first hint of rising seas. They adapted, camps shifted, diets broadened, tools evolved. When rivers widened, they fished them. When marshes spread, they harvested waterfowl. Even when tsunamis struck, communities endured. Change was not the end, but a call to move, to reimagine, to carry knowledge forward. Third, it offers perspective. Rising seas are not new. They have reshaped coasts many times before. But what is new is our scale. Billions of people, cities on deltas, nations tied to fixed shorelines. Doggerland whispers a warning: the sea does not bargain. It moves as climate dictates. We must prepare, adapt, or retreat, just as Mesolithic families once did. Yet Doggerland's story is not only caution, it is also wonder. That we can reconstruct a drowned world from sonar echoes and pollen grains is itself a marvel. That fragments of antler and flint can carry us back into lives lived 9 millennia ago speaks to the persistence of human presence. And it is, finally, a meditation on memory. Doggerlandi's people left no chronicles, but their world is not entirely lost. We recover it piece by piece, patiently, respectfully. To tell its story is to honor them, not as myths or as Atlantis, but as real people, living real lives, adapting to real change. Perhaps in that sense, Doggerland is less a lost land than a mirror. It shows us that change is constant, that seas rise, that people endure, It teaches us to hold lightly to the illusion of permanence and to stay attentive to the landscapes we call home. In the next and final part, we'll say farewell, returning gently from drowned plains to the present moment, closing with calm, reflection, and gratitude. And so, we arrive at the quiet end of our journey. We began with a fisherman's net, lifting a mammoth tusk from dark water, a silent reminder of a vanished world. We traced Doggerland's valleys and rivers through seismic maps, walked its meadows in imagination, listened to its people through their tools and fires. We paused for myths, sifted mud for pollen and DNA, considered ethics, and set Doggerland in the wider context of drowned lands across the earth. What remains is not certainty, but connection. Doggerland is gone, but it is not lost. Its bones lie in seabeds, its forests in pollen grains, its stories in our effort to listen. Each artifact, each core, each echo of seismic sound brings us a little closer to lives that mattered, lives not so different from our own. This journey has been slow and deliberate, a drift across time. I hope it has left you calm, reflective, perhaps even soothed by the gentle rhythm of history unfolding. For Doggerland's story is not a tale of tragedy alone, but of resilience. People adapting, moving, enduring as seas rose around them. In their quiet adjustments, there is wisdom for us too. As you settle back now, perhaps closing your eyes, remember, the map is never fixed. Rivers wander, coasts change, islands appear and vanish. What endures is the human capacity to notice, to adapt, and to remember. Thank you for walking with me across this drowned heartland. If you've found peace in this story, I invite you to return again, to listen while you rest, drive, cook, or drift to sleep. And if you feel called, share how you listen, for these stories are meant to travel, just as people once did across Doggerland's plain. For now, we'll leave the rivers and meadows to the sea, their voices hushed, but not forgotten. Stay curious, stay calm,